Marcus Blackwood stood at the edge of the cliff, his dark coat whipping in the harsh October wind. Below him, the city of Ravenhold spread like a blanket of twinkling stars, each light representing lives he had once protected but now avoided. His pale hands gripped the stone railing as memories crashed over him like violent waves. It had been exactly 3 years since that cursed night when everything changed. 3 years since he had made the choice that would haunt him for eternity. 3 years since he had turned his back on Isabella Chen, the woman who had loved him despite knowing what he truly was. Marcus closed his crimson eyes and let himself remember. He had been different then, still clinging to fragments of his humanity despite being a vampire for over 2 centuries. Isabella had been a trauma surgeon at Ravenhold General Hospital, working night shifts that aligned perfectly with his nocturnal existence. She had auburn hair that caught moonlight like fire, and eyes the color of warm honey that seemed to see straight through to whatever remained of his soul. Their relationship had been impossible from the start. Marcus was the unofficial king of the vampire community in Ravenhold, responsible for maintaining the delicate balance between his kind and the human world. Isabella was everything pure and healing in a world that had shown Marcus only darkness and death. Yet somehow, against all odds, they had found each other. The first time Marcus had revealed his true nature to Isabella, she had been treating a patient who had been attacked by a rogue vampire. Marcus had arrived at the hospital, drawn by the scent of supernatural violence. He found Isabella in the emergency room, her scrubs stained with blood, frantically trying to save a young man whose wounds defied medical explanation. "You can't save him with medicine," Marcus had whispered, appearing beside her like a shadow. Isabella had spun around, her eyes wide with exhaustion and desperation. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" she demanded, but Marcus could hear her heart hammering with fear and something else he couldn't quite identify. Instead of answering, Marcus had leaned over the dying man and placed his hand over the wounds. Isabella watched in stunned silence as an otherworldly energy flowed from Marcus's fingers, sealing the tears in the patient's neck. The monitors that had been screaming warnings suddenly showed stable vital signs. "What are you?" Isabella had breathed, her voice barely audible above the beeping machines. Marcus had looked at her then, really looked at her, and seen something he hadn't encountered in 200 years. There was no disgust in her expression, no immediate terror. Instead, there was wonder, curiosity, and an inexplicable trust that made his dead heart ache. "I'm what you would call a vampire," he had told her simply. "And that man was attacked by one of my kind. I'm sorry I couldn't prevent it. Most humans would have run screaming or fainted." Isabella Chen had simply nodded and asked, "Can you help me understand how to treat these kinds of injuries in the future?" That conversation had been the beginning of everything. Over the following months, Marcus found himself drawn to the hospital during Isabella's shifts. He would help her save victims of supernatural attacks, using his abilities to heal wounds that human medicine couldn't touch. In return, Isabella helped him remember what it felt like to do good in the world, to be something other than a predator in the darkness. Their love had grown slowly, carefully, like a flower blooming in winter. Isabella would finish her shifts and meet Marcus on the hospital roof, where they would talk until sunrise painted the sky pink and gold. She told him about her dreams of opening a free clinic for the city's homeless population. He shared stories of the centuries he had lived, the beauty and horror he had witnessed, the loneliness that had consumed him before she arrived. Marcus remembered the night he first kissed her. It had been during a particularly brutal winter storm. Isabella had lost 3 patients in one shift, all victims of a vampire attack that Marcus had been too late to prevent. She had found him on their usual rooftop, tears freezing on her cheeks before they could fall. "I couldn't save them," she had whispered, collapsing into his arms. "All my training, all my knowledge, and I couldn't save them." Marcus had held her against his chest, her warmth seeping into his cold skin like sunlight. "You save people every day, Isabella. You've saved me in ways you can't imagine." She had looked up at him then, her honey-colored eyes searching his face. "Have I?" Instead of answering with words, Marcus had cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. The moment their lips touched, he felt something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. For the first time in 2 centuries, Marcus Blackwood believed he might be capable of something other than darkness. Their relationship had lasted 2 beautiful, impossible years. Isabella moved into Marcus's penthouse apartment, a sprawling space on the top floor of the city's oldest building. She filled his dark rooms with plants and photographs, with medical journals and the smell of coffee in the morning. Marcus renovated the entire top floor into a state-of-the-art medical facility where Isabella could treat supernatural injuries away from the prying eyes of hospital administration. During those 2 years, Marcus felt more human than he had since his transformation. He found himself looking forward to Isabella's return from work each night. He would wait for her with dinner prepared, even though he couldn't eat it himself. They would share stories of their respective days, her saving lives while he managed the complex politics of keeping the vampire community hidden from human authorities. Isabella had been fascinated by his world. She insisted on meeting other vampires, on understanding the society Marcus governed. She treated their injuries with the same compassion she showed human patients. Some of Marcus's kind had been suspicious of her at first, but Isabella's genuine desire to help and her complete lack of judgment had gradually won them over. Thomas Hartley, Marcus's closest friend and second-in-command, had been particularly protective of their secret. "She's dangerous," he had warned Marcus one night. "Not because she means us harm, but because she makes you vulnerable." What happens if the Vampire Council decides she knows too much? Marcus had dismissed Thomas's concerns at the time. He had been drunk on love, on the possibility of a future he had never dared to imagine. Isabella had talked about them traveling together once she finished her residency. She had dreamed of them opening medical facilities in remote areas where supernatural and human communities overlapped, places where her skills and his abilities could help the most vulnerable populations. But Marcus's happiness had made him careless. His attention had been divided between his responsibilities as Vampire King and his devotion to Isabella. He had missed the signs of growing unrest within the vampire community. Younger vampires, led by an ambitious vampire named Vincent Crawford, had begun questioning Marcus's leadership. They whispered that he had gone soft, that his relationship with a human made him unfit to rule. The rumors had reached the ears of the Vampire Council, the ancient governing body that oversaw vampire communities across the globe. Marcus had received a summons to appear before them just days before everything fell apart. The message had been delivered by a pale woman with silver hair who had appeared in his apartment like smoke. "Marcus Blackwood," she had said in a voice like winter wind, "you are commanded to appear before the council within the fortnight. There are concerns about your recent choices." Isabella had been in the shower when the messenger arrived, and Marcus had made the woman leave before Isabella could see her. But the seed of fear had been planted. Marcus knew the council's history with vampires who became too involved with humans. Such relationships were considered a threat to the species' survival, a weakness that could expose them all. That night, Marcus had held Isabella close as she slept, memorizing the feeling of her heartbeat against his chest. He had known, with a certainty that chilled him, that their time was running out. The council would demand he choose between his crown and his heart, between his responsibilities to his kind and his love for the woman who had given his existence meaning. For days, Marcus had wrestled with the decision. He could defy the council, refuse their demands, but that would mean war. Other vampire communities would turn against Ravenholt, and Isabella would be caught in the crossfire. She would become a target, hunted by creatures far more ruthless than Marcus had ever been. Alternatively, he could give her up, break her heart to keep her safe, maintain his position as king and continue protecting both the vampire and human populations of Ravenholt. It was the logical choice, the responsible choice, the choice that would save the most lives. Marcus had made his decision on a Thursday night in November. Isabella had been working a double shift at the hospital, and Marcus had spent the hours pacing his apartment like a caged animal. When she finally came home, exhausted and covered in other people's blood, Marcus had been waiting with a glass of wine and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Rough night?" he had asked, the words feeling like glass in his throat. Isabella had collapsed onto their couch, kicking off her shoes and rubbing her tired feet. 3 car accidents and a building fire. Sometimes I wonder if this city is cursed. She had looked up at him then, her honey eyes soft with affection. But coming home to you makes it all worthwhile. Marcus had felt something inside him shatter. He had walked to the window, unable to look at her as he prepared to deliver the words that would destroy them both. "Isabella," he had said, his voice carefully controlled. "We need to talk." Something in his tone must have warned her. Marcus heard her heartbeat quicken, heard her shift on the couch to face him fully. "What's wrong, Marcus? You're scaring me." Marcus had turned then, forcing his face into a mask of cold indifference. It was a look he had perfected over 2 centuries, an expression that had intimidated enemies and commanded respect. He had never turned that look on Isabella before. "This relationship isn't working," he had said simply. "I think it's time we ended it." The silence that followed had been deafening. Marcus watched color drain from Isabella's face, watched her eyes go wide with shock and disbelief. Her heartbeat had stuttered, then began racing like a frightened bird. "What are you talking about?" she had whispered. "Marcus, I don't understand. Did I do something wrong?" Marcus had forced himself to remain cold, to ignore the pain in her voice. "You didn't do anything wrong. I simply realized that this was a mistake. We're too different, Isabella. This was never going to work long term." Isabella had stood up then, moving toward him with shaking hands extended. "Marcus, please. Talk to me. What's really going on? This isn't like you." Marcus had stepped back, avoiding her touch. If she had touched him, if he had felt her warmth, he would have crumbled. He would have told her everything and, damn the consequences. "I'm a vampire, Isabella. A killer. A creature of darkness. What made you think you could change that?" The words had been designed to hurt, to push her away before he lost his resolve. Isabella had recoiled as if he had struck her. Tears had begun streaming down her face, but her voice had remained steady. "You're not a killer, Marcus. I've seen who you really are. You save people. You protect them. You're good. You see what you want to see," Marcus had replied, each word cutting him deeper than any blade. "I am what I am, and I cannot be what you need." Isabella had stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for some sign of the man she loved. Marcus had kept his expression carefully blank, even as his soul screamed in agony. "Get out," she had whispered finally. "This is my apartment, Isabella. You'll need to find somewhere else to stay." The cruelty of his words had hit her like a physical blow. Isabella had stumbled backward, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. "You're throwing me out? Just like that? After everything we shared?" Marcus had nodded, not trusting himself to speak again. Isabella had looked at him for one more moment, her honey eyes filled with pain and confusion and a love that Marcus knew he didn't deserve. Then, she had turned and walked to their bedroom to pack her things. Marcus had stood frozen by the window, listening to the sounds of Isabella gathering her belongings. Every drawer that closed, every item that went into her suitcase, felt like another nail in his coffin. When she had emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, suitcase in hand, Marcus had still been standing in the same spot. Isabella had paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "I love you, Marcus Blackwood," she had said quietly. "Whatever's happening, whatever scared you into doing this, I want you to remember that someone loved you completely, exactly as you are." Then, she had walked out of his life, leaving Marcus alone in his dark apartment with only the scent of her perfume and the echo of her footsteps to remind him of what he had lost. That had been 3 years ago. Marcus had appeared before the Vampire Council the following week and had been praised for his wisdom in ending the relationship. Vincent Crawford's rebellion had fizzled without the ammunition of Marcus's human weakness to fuel it. Life in Ravenhold had returned to its carefully balanced normalcy. But Marcus had never recovered from that night. He ruled his vampire community with the same efficiency as before, but the light had gone out of him. He moved through his responsibilities like a ghost, protecting and governing without passion or joy. He had saved the city and his crown, but he had lost himself in the process. Now, standing on the cliff where he had first learned to fly centuries ago, Marcus felt the weight of his choices crushing him. In the distance, he could see the lights of Ravenholt General Hospital, where Isabella still worked the night shift, still saved lives, still brought light into the darkness. He had heard through various sources that she had never married, never found anyone else. Thomas reported that she seemed to throw herself into her work with an intensity that worried her colleagues. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact he had never deleted but had never called. Isabella's name glowed on the screen, accompanied by a photo he had taken of her sleeping peacefully in their bed, sunlight streaming across her face. His thumb hovered over the call button as wind howled around him. 3 years of emptiness stretched behind him. An eternity of regret spread ahead. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to imagine what he would say if he called her. How do you apologize for destroying the best thing that ever happened to you? How do you explain that you broke her heart to save her life? A sound in the distance made Marcus open his eyes. Emergency sirens were wailing from the direction of the hospital, more than he had ever heard at once. His vampire senses picked up the acrid smell of smoke and something else, something that made his blood run cold. Supernatural violence. And it was coming from the direction of Isabella's hospital. Marcus pocketed his phone and leaped from the cliff, transforming into a creature of shadow and speed as he raced through the night toward the woman he had never stopped loving and the danger that now threatened her life. Marcus arrived at Ravenholt General Hospital to find chaos consuming the building. Emergency vehicles surrounded the structure like metallic predators, their flashing lights painting the scene in shades of red and blue. Smoke poured from several windows on the upper floors, and Marcus could hear screaming from inside the building. He landed silently on the hospital roof, his enhanced senses immediately cataloging the threats below. The scent of vampire blood mixed with human terror filled his nostrils. This wasn't a random attack, Marcus realized with growing dread. Someone had specifically targeted the hospital where Isabella worked. Moving like liquid shadow, Marcus descended through the building's stairwells. The emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie amber glow, and the usual antiseptic smell of the hospital was overwhelmed by smoke and something far more sinister. As he reached the 7th floor, Marcus heard a familiar voice shouting orders above the chaos. Get the patients from rooms 704 through 712 down to the 3rd floor immediately. Use the east stairwell, the west one is compromised. Isabella's voice carried the authority born of years managing medical emergencies, but Marcus could detect the underlying strain of fear. He followed her voice to the main nurse's station, where he found Isabella coordinating the evacuation of her floor. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her scrubs were already stained with soot and blood. She was directing a team of nurses and orderlies while simultaneously treating a security guard whose arm bore distinctive claw marks. Marcus stepped out of the shadows, and Isabella's honey-colored eyes locked onto his immediately. For a moment, the chaos around them seemed to fade as 3 years of separation collapsed into nothing. Her face went through a series of emotions: surprise, pain, hope, and, finally, professional focus. Marcus, she said, her voice carefully controlled. I assume you're not here for a social visit. Before Marcus could respond, an inhuman roar echoed from somewhere deeper in the hospital. The lights flickered, and several nurses cried out in terror. Marcus felt his fangs extend involuntarily at the sound. He recognized the call of a vampire in bloodlust, but this was different. Older. More powerful. Isabella, you need to get everyone out of this building now, Marcus said, moving closer to her. This isn't a random attack. Isabella finished bandaging the security guard's arm and looked up at Marcus with the same steady gaze he remembered from their years together. I have 37 patients on this floor who can't be moved without proper medical transport. Some of them are on life support. I'm not abandoning them. Another roar, closer this time, made the windows rattle. Marcus grabbed Isabella's arm, feeling the familiar warmth of her skin through her sleeve. Isabella, please. Whatever's in this hospital, it's not something your security team can handle. Isabella pulled away from his touch, and Marcus felt the loss like a physical wound. Then, help me save them instead of trying to convince me to run. Before Marcus could argue further, the elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open with a cheerful ding that seemed obscenely out of place. What emerged from those doors made Marcus's centuries of experience with supernatural horrors seem inadequate. Vincent Crawford stepped into the hallway, but he was no longer the ambitious young vampire Marcus remembered. Vincent's transformation was horrifying to behold. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor that suggested something far worse than ordinary vampirism. His eyes burned with an unnatural red light, and, when he smiled, Marcus could see that his canine teeth had been replaced with something resembling a shark's serrated fangs. "Marcus Blackwood," Vincent said, his voice carrying harmonics that hurt to hear. "How good of you to join us. I was hoping you would come running to save your precious human." Behind Vincent, 3 other creatures emerged from the elevator. Marcus recognized them as vampires who had disappeared from Ravenholt over the past year, vampires he had assumed had simply moved to other territories. Now he could see they had undergone the same horrifying transformation as Vincent. "Vincent," Marcus said, positioning himself between the approaching monsters and Isabella. "What have you done to yourself?" Vincent laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I've evolved, Marcus. While you were wallowing in self-pity over your lost love, I was discovering new possibilities. There are older things than vampires in this world, ancient powers that can make us so much more than we ever imagined." Marcus felt Isabella move behind him, heard her quietly giving instructions to her staff to evacuate the floor through the emergency stairs. Her calm competence in the face of supernatural terror filled him with fierce pride and even fiercer protectiveness. "The Council will destroy you for this," Marcus warned, though he was already calculating attack vectors and escape routes. Vincent and his creatures had positioned themselves to block the main exit from the floor. "The Council?" Vincent scoffed. "The Council is a collection of old fools clinging to outdated traditions. They forbid us from reaching our true potential because they're afraid of change." "But I've found new masters, Marcus. Ancient ones who remember when vampires were gods, not shadows hiding from human notice." As Vincent spoke, Marcus noticed changes in the other transformed vampires. Their movements were wrong, too fluid and predatory even for their kind. One of them, a vampire named Sarah Mitchell who had been turned only 50 years ago, was now sporting what appeared to be additional joints in her arms and legs. Another had developed a second set of smaller eyes below his primary ones. "You've made a deal with demons," Marcus realized with growing horror. "Vincent, do you have any idea what you've unleashed?" "I've unleashed evolution," Vincent replied. "But first, I'm going to complete some unfinished business." Vincent's transformed gaze fixed on Isabella, who had moved to stand beside Marcus rather than behind him. Marcus felt her hand slip into his, her fingers intertwining with his own. The simple gesture sent warmth flooding through his undead body. "Dr. Isabella Chen," Vincent continued. "The woman who corrupted our king, who made him weak and sentimental. Did you know, Doctor, that Marcus threw you away like garbage to appease the Council? Did you know that your great love chose his crown over your heart?" Marcus felt Isabella's hand tighten in his, but her voice remained steady. "I know Marcus made a difficult choice. I also know he's spent the last 3 years protecting this city, including protecting me, whether I knew it or not." Vincent's enhanced features twisted into a snarl. "Still defending him, even after he abandoned you? How pathetic. No matter. You'll both die tonight, and I'll take Marcus's place as the true king of this city." The attack came without further warning. Vincent launched himself across the hallway with inhuman speed, his clawed hands aimed at Isabella's throat. Marcus met him halfway, catching Vincent around the waist and driving him backward into the wall. The impact sent spider web cracks through the plaster and made the entire floor shake. The other 3 transformed vampires spread out, moving to surround Marcus and Isabella. Marcus could hear Isabella moving behind him, could smell the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with antiseptic and fear sweat. But there was no panic in her movements, only the controlled efficiency of someone used to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. Vincent recovered from the impact faster than any normal vampire should have been able to. His clawed hand raked across Marcus's chest, tearing through his shirt and leaving 4 parallel gashes in the skin beneath. The wounds burned with an unnatural fire that suggested Vincent's claws carried some kind of supernatural poison. You're slower than you used to be, Marcus, Vincent taunted, circling like a predator. 3 years of brooding have made you soft. Marcus tested his reflexes and realized Vincent might be right. Grief and isolation had dulled his edge, made him less precise in his movements. But, as he heard Isabella's heartbeat steady and strong behind him, Marcus felt something awakening in him that had been dormant for 3 years. Purpose. Protective fury. Love. Sarah Mitchell chose that moment to attack from Marcus's left flank. She moved with her unnaturally articulated limbs, approaching from an angle that should have been impossible for a humanoid form to achieve. Marcus spun to meet her attack, but found himself grabbed from behind by another of Vincent's creatures. The transformed vampire's grip was inhumanly strong, pinning Marcus's arms to his sides. Sarah's clawed hands reached for his throat, her face split by a grin that revealed far too many teeth. Marcus prepared to break free when he heard the distinctive sound of a pneumatic medical device activating. Isabella appeared beside Sarah with a large syringe in her hand, the kind used for drawing blood samples. Before the transformed vampire could react, Isabella plunged the needle into Sarah's neck and depressed the plunger. Sarah screamed and released Marcus, clawing at her neck where the injection site was already turning black. "What did you give her?" Marcus asked as he broke free from the other vampire's grip. "Concentrated holy water mixed with silver nitrate," Isabella replied calmly, already preparing another syringe. "I've been developing treatments for supernatural injuries for 3 years. I figured prevention was just as important as cure." Sarah collapsed to the floor, her transformed features beginning to smoke and dissolve. The sight of her dissolution seemed to enrage the remaining attackers. Vincent let out another of his inhuman roars and charged directly at Isabella, moving faster than human eyes could track. Marcus intercepted him again, this time ready for Vincent's enhanced speed. They crashed through the door of a patient room, scattering medical equipment and overturning furniture. Marcus could feel Vincent's claws seeking vulnerable points, could smell the corruption that clung to his former subject like a physical presence. "She's made you weak, Marcus," Vincent hissed as they grappled among the overturned hospital beds. "Love is a disease that infects the strong and makes them vulnerable." "Love isn't weakness," Marcus replied, driving his elbow into Vincent's ribs with enough force to shatter normal bones. "Love is what gives us something worth fighting for." Marcus threw Vincent across the room, sending him crashing through the large window that looked out over the city. Vincent hung in the air for a moment, suspended 7 stories above the hospital parking lot, before his transformed body sprouted what appeared to be wing-like membranes from his arms and back. "The old ways are dying, Marcus," Vincent called as he hovered outside the broken window. "The humans will learn what real monsters look like, and, when they do, they'll remember why they used to fear the dark." With that, Vincent disappeared into the night sky, his remaining followers retreating with him. Marcus stood in the destroyed hospital room, breathing heavily despite not needing oxygen. The silence that followed the battle felt almost as loud as the chaos that had preceded it. Isabella appeared in the doorway, still holding her improvised weapons. She surveyed the destruction with the clinical eye of someone used to assessing damage. "Well," she said finally, "that could have gone worse." Marcus turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time in 3 years. She was older, there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, and her face carried a weariness that spoke of long nights and difficult choices. But she was still beautiful, still radiant with the inner strength that had first captured his attention. "Isabella," he began, then stopped. What could he possibly say? How could he explain 3 years of loneliness and regret? How could he apologize for the choice that had saved her life but destroyed both their hearts? Isabella walked over to stand beside him at the broken window, looking out at the city lights. "Thomas Hartley came to see me about 6 months after we ended things," she said quietly. "He told me about the council, about the choice you had to make. He thought I deserved to know the truth." Marcus felt his dead heart skip a beat. "Isabella, You could have told me," she continued, still looking out at the city rather than at him. "We could have faced it together. We could have found another way." "There was no other way," Marcus replied, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "The council would have ordered your death." Other vampire communities would have seen you as a threat. I couldn't protect you from all of them. Isabella turned to face him then, her honey-colored eyes bright with unshed tears. So you broke my heart to save my life? Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Isabella stared at him for a long moment, her medical mind probably cataloging his appearance the same way he had catalogued hers. Finally, she reached out and touched the claw marks on his chest, her fingers gentle against his torn skin. These need treatment, she said in her professional voice. Vincent's claws were poisoned with something I haven't seen before. Marcus caught her hand, holding it against his chest. Isabella, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you, for the pain I caused. You deserved better than the choice I made. Isabella's tears finally spilled over, tracing silver tracks down her cheeks. I know you were trying to protect me, Marcus. I've always known. But it still hurt. It still broke something in me that I don't think will ever fully heal. Marcus felt his own tears beginning to fall, the first he had shed in 3 years. I've thought about you every day since that night. I've regretted every word I said, every moment of pain I caused you. I would take it all back if I could. Isabella stepped closer to him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. Vincent was right about one thing, she said softly. The old ways are dying. The supernatural world is changing, becoming more dangerous. You can't protect everyone by hiding in the shadows anymore. Marcus nodded, understanding beginning to dawn. You want to help. I'd been preparing for 3 years, Isabella admitted. Learning everything I could about supernatural medicine, developing treatments and weapons. When Thomas told me the truth about why you left, I realized I had 2 choices. I could let the pain destroy me, or I could use it to become strong enough to stand beside you when you needed me. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the warmth of her skin. Isabella Chen, you are the strongest person I have ever known. Strong enough to face whatever comes next, she asked. Marcus leaned down and kissed her, pouring 3 years of love and regret and desperate hope into the contact. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Together, Marcus promised. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Outside the broken window, the first light of dawn was beginning to paint the eastern horizon. Marcus should have been seeking shelter from the coming sun, but, for the first time in 3 years, he felt hope warming him more effectively than any darkness ever could. The battle with Vincent was far from over. The transformed vampires represented a threat unlike anything Marcus had faced in his centuries of existence. But he was no longer facing it alone. Isabella had spent 3 years preparing to stand beside him, and, together, they would find a way to protect both their worlds. As sirens continued to wail in the distance and hospital staff began the process of assessing and repairing the damage, Marcus and Isabella stood hand in hand at the broken window. The scars of their separation would always remain, but they were finally ready to begin healing together. 2 months after the hospital attack, Marcus stood in what had once been the abandoned warehouse district of Ravenholt, but was now something unprecedented in the supernatural world. Isabella's dream of a medical facility that served both human and vampire populations had become reality, though not in the way either of them had originally imagined. The sanctuary, as they had named it, occupied 3 renovated warehouse buildings connected by covered walkways. The main building housed state-of-the-art medical equipment capable of treating everything from supernatural poisoning to demonic possession. The second building contained living quarters for patients who needed extended care, with rooms specially designed for different supernatural species. The third building served as research laboratories where Isabella and a carefully selected team of human and vampire scientists worked to understand and combat the growing threat of transformed creatures like Vincent Crawford. Marcus watched through reinforced windows as Isabella moved through the main medical bay, checking on patients with the same gentle efficiency he remembered from their early days together. Her team included Dr. Sarah Kim, a human surgeon who had volunteered after witnessing a vampire save her daughter from a car accident, and Dr. Elena Vasquez, a vampire who had been turned during the Spanish flu pandemic and had spent the last century studying supernatural medicine. The sanctuary represented everything Marcus had never dared to hope for, a place where the supernatural and human worlds could coexist openly and beneficially. It had taken weeks of careful negotiation with both the Vampire Council and various government agencies to make it possible. The official story, released to the media, described it as an experimental medical facility specializing in rare blood disorders. The truth was known only to a select few humans in positions of power who had been carefully vetted and sworn to secrecy. "You're brooding again," Thomas Hartley said, appearing beside Marcus with the silent grace that made him such an effective second-in-command. "It's not as attractive a look as you seem to think it is." Marcus smiled slightly, the first genuine expression of humor he had shown in years. "I'm not brooding, Thomas. I'm planning." "Planning what, exactly?" Thomas asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Vincent hasn't been idle these past 2 months," Marcus replied, turning away from the window. "We've had reports of transformed vampires in 7 other cities. Whatever process he's using to create these creatures, he's spreading it systematically." Thomas nodded grimly. "Elena's research suggests the transformation involves some kind of demonic symbiosis. The vampires aren't just being enhanced, they're being possessed by entities that feed on both blood and life force." Marcus felt a familiar chill at the mention of demons. During his 2 centuries of existence, he had encountered demonic forces only twice, and both experiences had left him with a healthy respect for their power and cunning. If Vincent had allied himself with such creatures, the threat to both supernatural and human communities was far greater than Marcus had initially realized. "What does Isabella think?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew her opinion. "She thinks we need to go on the offensive," Thomas replied. "She's been working with Elena to develop a more potent version of her holy water weapon. Something that might be able to reverse the transformation process." Marcus nodded, unsurprised by Isabella's characteristically direct approach to the problem. During their 2 months of reunion, he had watched her throw herself into the work of understanding and combating the supernatural threats facing their city. Her dedication was absolute, her courage unwavering, and her innovative approaches to supernatural medicine had already saved dozens of lives. Their personal relationship was healing as well, though more slowly. They had moved back in together, but both carried scars from their 3-year separation that required careful tending. There were still moments when Marcus caught Isabella looking at him with a shadow of the old hurt in her eyes. There were still nights when he woke from dreams where he was forced to choose between her safety and his responsibilities all over again. But there were also moments of pure joy that reminded Marcus why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. The way she laughed when he brought her coffee during her long research sessions. The way she fell asleep reading medical journals, her head resting on his shoulder. The way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching, with a love so fierce and complete it took his breath away. "Marcus?" Thomas's voice brought him back to the present. "There's something else you need to know." The serious tone in his friend's voice immediately put Marcus on alert. "What is it?" "We received a message from the council this morning. They're sending a representative to evaluate our operation here. Someone named Counselor Morgana Blackthorne." Marcus felt ice form in his veins at the mention of that name. Morgana Blackthorne was one of the oldest and most powerful members of the Vampire Council, a creature who had been turned during the height of the Roman Empire and had spent the intervening centuries accumulating power and influence. She was also known for her absolute intolerance of anything she perceived as a threat to vampire secrecy. "When?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow night." Marcus closed his eyes and tried to calculate the implications. Morgana's arrival could mean several things, none of them good. The council might have decided that the sanctuary was too visible, too risky for the supernatural community's continued secrecy. They might have learned about Isabella's weapons research and decided she represented a threat. Worst of all, they might have discovered the extent of Vincent's demonic alliance and decided that Marcus was no longer capable of handling the threat. "Have you told Isabella?" Marcus asked. Thomas shook his head. "I thought you should decide how much she needs to know." Marcus appreciated his friend's discretion, but he had learned his lesson about keeping secrets from Isabella. "She needs to know everything. We're partners now, Thomas. In all things. As if summoned by his words, Isabella appeared in the doorway of the observation room. She had traded her hospital scrubs for dark jeans and a sweater, but she still wore the stethoscope around her neck that had become her signature accessory. Her auburn hair was longer now, reaching past her shoulders, and Marcus found himself fascinated by the way the light caught the red highlights. "Partners in what?" she asked, moving to stand beside Marcus at the window. "And why do you both look like someone just told you the world was ending?" Marcus slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close. "The Vampire Council is sending a representative to evaluate our work here. Morgana Blackthorn arrives tomorrow night." Isabella was quiet for a moment, processing the information with the analytical mind that made her such a gifted physician. "This Morgana Blackthorn, I assume she's not known for her progressive attitudes toward human-vampire cooperation?" "That would be an understatement," Thomas replied. "Morgana has been advocating for stricter separation protocols for decades. She believes any significant contact between humans and vampires inevitably leads to exposure and persecution." "Well," Isabella said after another moment of consideration, "then we'll just have to show her how wrong she is." Marcus felt a smile tug at his lips despite the gravity of the situation. Isabella's unshakable confidence in the rightness of their cause was one of the things he loved most about her. She had a gift for seeing solutions where others saw only problems. "Isabella, you don't understand," Marcus said gently. "If Morgana decides the sanctuary is too dangerous, she has the authority to shut us down. She could order every vampire in the city to leave Ravenholt. She could even order your memory wiped." Isabella turned in his arms to face him fully, her honey-colored eyes blazing with determination. "Then, we make sure she doesn't want to shut us down. We show her patients we've saved, research breakthroughs we've made, the lives we've improved. We make her see that this place isn't a threat to vampire security, it's the future of human supernatural relations." Thomas looked skeptical. "Morgana Blackthorn isn't known for changing her mind once it's made up." "Everyone can change their mind if presented with the right evidence," Isabella replied with the confidence of someone who had spent years convincing skeptical patients to accept difficult treatment plans. "We just need to figure out what evidence will be most compelling to her." Marcus felt pride swell in his chest as he watched Isabella's medical mind work through the problem. This was why he had fallen in love with her, this combination of compassion and determination, this refusal to accept defeat when lives were at stake. "What do you suggest?" he asked. Isabella walked over to the wall where they had mounted a large map of the city. Red pins marked locations where Vincent's transformed creatures had been sighted. Blue pins showed places where sanctuary teams had successfully intervened to prevent supernatural violence. Green pins indicated humans who had been treated at the sanctuary and later became allies in maintaining the secret. "Look at this," Isabella said, tracing patterns on the map with her finger. "In the 2 months since we opened, supernatural violence in Ravenholt has decreased by 67%. Human casualties from supernatural causes have dropped to almost zero. We're not just treating injuries anymore, Marcus. We're preventing them." Thomas moved to stand beside the map, his expression thoughtful. The integration protocols Isabella developed have been remarkably successful. Even vampires who were initially suspicious of working with humans have begun to appreciate the advantages. Marcus nodded, remembering his own amazement at watching vampire and human medical teams work together seamlessly. Isabella had developed communication systems that allowed rapid response to supernatural emergencies throughout the city. Her human contacts in the police department and emergency services could discreetly redirect cases that required supernatural intervention. Her vampire contacts could gather intelligence and provide security for operations that might be dangerous for humans. "We've also made genuine scientific breakthroughs," Isabella continued, moving to a display board covered with research photographs and data charts. "Elena's work on the demonic transformation process has advanced more in 2 months than in the previous 50 years of isolated vampire research. My collaboration with Dr. Kim has led to new treatments for supernatural injuries that were previously considered fatal." Marcus studied the research displays, many of which he didn't fully understand despite his centuries of experience. Isabella and her team had developed treatments for werewolf silver poisoning, fairy iron burns, and demonic possession symptoms. They had created weapons that could subdue supernatural threats without permanent harm, tools that could detect otherworldly influences, and communication systems that worked across species barriers. The question, Thomas said slowly, is whether Morgana will see all of this as proof that the sanctuary works, or as evidence that we become too visible, too integrated with human society. Isabella was quiet for a moment, then moved to another section of the display that Marcus hadn't seen before. This one showed photographs of patients, both human and vampire, who had been treated at the sanctuary. Below each photograph was a brief description of their injury and recovery. "This is Maria Santos," Isabella said, pointing to a photograph of a young Hispanic woman holding a baby. "She was attacked by one of Vincent's creatures 3 weeks ago. By the time the paramedics found her, she had lost so much blood that no human hospital could have saved her. We gave her emergency transfusions of specially treated vampire blood, and she made a complete recovery. She goes home tomorrow with her 6-month-old daughter." Isabella moved to another photograph, this one showing an elderly vampire Marcus recognized as Jonathan Hayes, one of the city's oldest residents. Jonathan was injured trying to protect a group of human children from a transformed vampire. The creature's claws carried some kind of demonic poison that was slowly killing him. "Elena and I developed a treatment that not only saved his life but has made him stronger than he's been in decades." As Isabella continued describing cases, Marcus began to understand her strategy. She wasn't just going to present Morgana with abstract data about reduced violence and improved safety. She was going to show her real people, real lives that had been saved and improved by the sanctuary's work. "Every person on this wall represents a victory," Isabella said, her voice carrying the passion that had first drawn Marcus to her. "Every successful treatment, every prevented attack, every human who now understands that not all supernatural creatures are threats, every vampire who now believes that humans can be trusted allies. This is what we've built, Marcus. This is what we're fighting to protect." Marcus felt something shift inside him as he listened to Isabella speak. For 3 years, he had carried the weight of his choice to abandon their relationship, the guilt of breaking her heart, the regret of lost possibilities. But, looking at what they had built together in just 2 months, he began to understand that their separation, painful as it had been, had prepared them for this moment. Isabella had used their time apart to become someone who could stand as an equal partner in protecting both their worlds. She had developed skills and knowledge that complemented his own strengths perfectly. She had learned to navigate supernatural politics with the same skill she brought to hospital administration. Most importantly, she had learned to see their relationship not as a weakness that made him vulnerable, but as a strength that made them both more effective. "Morgana arrives tomorrow night," Marcus said, making his decision. "We'll arrange for her to tour the facility, meet some of our patients, review our research. But we'll also make sure she understands that this isn't just about medicine or safety statistics." "What do you mean?" Thomas asked. Marcus took Isabella's hand, intertwining their fingers the way they had during the hospital attack. "This is about evolution, Thomas. Not the kind Vincent is pursuing through demonic corruption, but genuine evolution. The supernatural world is changing whether the Council approves or not. We can either guide the change toward cooperation and mutual benefit, or we can cling to old fears and watch everything burn." Isabella squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with understanding. "You're going to ask her to support us officially?" Marcus nodded. "The sanctuary has proven itself. Isabella's protocols have shown that humans and vampires can work together successfully. It's time for the Council to acknowledge that the future isn't about hiding in the shadows, it's about building bridges." Thomas looked between them, his expression mixing admiration with concern. "You realize that if Morgana refuses, if she decides you're both too dangerous to the established order, she won't just shut down the sanctuary. She'll move to remove you from power permanently." Marcus felt Isabella's hand tighten in his, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Then, we make sure she doesn't refuse. We show her a future so compelling, so obviously beneficial to both our peoples, that refusing would be the truly dangerous choice." As the three of them stood together looking at the evidence of what they had accomplished, Marcus felt a sense of completion that had been missing from his existence for centuries. Isabella was right, they were building something unprecedented, something that could transform the relationship between the supernatural and human worlds forever. But, first, they had to survive Morgana Blackthorn's evaluation. Marcus had faced ancient vampires, demon-possessed creatures, and the political machinations of the council before. Tomorrow night, with Isabella at his side and their shared vision guiding them, he would face the greatest challenge of his long existence. The future of both their worlds hung in the balance, and Marcus Blackwood had never been more ready to fight for what he believed in. Outside the sanctuary's windows, the last light of day was fading into darkness. Soon, Marcus would need to return to his nocturnal existence, to the responsibilities of leading the vampire community through increasingly dangerous times. But he would not face those challenges alone anymore. Isabella moved closer to him, her warmth chasing away the eternal chill that came with his undead nature. "Whatever happens tomorrow night, Marcus, we face it together." Marcus brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Together," he agreed. "Always together." The scars of their separation would always remain, reminders of the price they had paid for the choices that brought them to this moment. But those scars had also made them stronger, wiser, more committed to the love that had survived 3 years of separation and emerged more powerful than before. Tomorrow would bring Morgana Blackthorn and the judgment of the Vampire Council. It would bring new challenges and difficult choices. But it would also bring new possibilities, new hope for a future where love could bridge the gap between worlds. Marcus Blackwood, the vampire king who had once forsaken love to protect his people, now stood ready to fight for a future where love and duty could finally coexist. And, beside him stood Dr. Isabella Chen, the woman whose strength and vision had shown him that the greatest power wasn't found in ruling from the shadows, but in building something beautiful in the light. The night was just beginning, and, with it, the dawn of a new world.